Nate, we are back, and we are so sick of these 2024 rookies that we are taking that early look ahead at 2025. But in reality, we just want to take a look at what the strengths and weaknesses of the next upcoming class could be. What kind of players do we have coming out with this class? And hey, let's get a little excited about what we have coming to the NFL for us next year. Possibly some of these guys could go back, who knows? It's fun list we got here. We are looking at your predictive first round, what the first round might look like in rookie drafts. At the end of the day, there is going to be a ton of movement between now and then. We expect things to change. We expect our opinions to change and all that. But before we get into it, be sure you're liking the video, commenting down below players you're excited to learn about and excited to dive into in this upcoming 2025 class. However, your 24 rookie draft's gone. And of course, if you want to chat it up that much more with us, talk the 2025 draft, get in that Patreon, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind, get in that Discord for a free 7 days. Link in the YouTube description as well as the pinned comment. But Nate, with all the promo in the books, let's get to the content the people came for. Who is your first pick off the board in your predictive mock? What do you got for us?
Yeah, I struggled with this one for a second because it's super flex. So like you always go quarterback, right? That's the first overall pick. But there's a lot of question marks about the 2025 quarterback class at this moment. No one has necessarily really proven to be, a quarterback one type of talent. There's no Caleb Williams in this draft. There's not even necessarily a Drake May in this class that, we've been looking at for a couple of years and I'm really, really excited about. But Bob, I do have a quarterback that I do think is the very obvious quarterback one at the moment, and that is Carson Beck out of Georgia. And for me, at the 101 here, I have him going because at the end of the day, super flex, quarterbacks rule. And I think there's enough wide receiver talent at the top of this draft class where we don't have to necessarily pick one at the one overall. Like this year, if Caleb Williams wasn't in the draft, we would have seen Marvin Harrison go one overall in most of our drafts over the other quarterbacks because as good as Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze are, Marvin Harrison's that guy. I don't know if we have a Marvin Harrison talent quite to that level in this class, but we do have a couple guys that I think could challenge for Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze style level of talent. So you don't have to necessarily reach for one of the first spots. So I think quarterback, when there's a drop off after the quarterback one at the moment for me, I think the quarterback would go 101 here. For me, Carson Beck showed incredible control of that offense in Georgia last year. And that was with injuries to Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers. It was not the Georgia offense we've seen over the past couple of years where they're just loaded with talent. I mean, you go back and look at the Stetson Bennett days and the offensive weapons that were around him. I mean, George Pickens, Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Zamir White, other players that have made it to the NFL as well. I mean, they were chock full of talent. And we might see that with Georgia's offense as well. But at this moment that we saw last year and going into this year, it is not full of talent like that, not full of playmakers that are already proven. So Carson Beck, one of the best passers in the SEC last year, led the SEC in a lot of passing categories. I expect him to do great things this year, but all the offense is really going to be on him. So this is going to be, he can show up and prove that he's the quarterback one for this draft, or if he struggles without the talent around him, it'll be up for debate who's the quarterback one in this class. But right now, looking forward, for me, it's Carson Beck.
As it stands right now, there's a lot that can change. We've seen how quickly quarterbacks can fluctuate with, just looking at this last year, even JJ McCarthy was not even, I think, thought of as like a first round pick in this year's draft. Outside of you, I didn't see anybody touting for Bo Nix. So, there's so much movement that can happen with this quarterback class, with it being so ambiguous. We're going to talk about a few more quarterbacks, but there's definitely a weakness in this quarterback class, or the weakness of this class is going to be quarterback. And that's even, and I personally, I don't know this class as well as you do yet, but I feel like I'd be surprised right now if Carson Beck was the first overall pick in Superflex drafts this year. I think it is going to be one of these rookie wide receivers. We could see, depending on how some very interesting situations play out, I think we could see a running back push for one of these top spots as well. It's going to be interesting. Stay tuned, stay plugged in, subscribe if you aren't already. We are going to peel apart this class like you wouldn't believe over time. Looking at Carson Beck at this point, he's a one-year wonder. He was sitting behind Stetson Bennett for a handful of years, redshirted his first year as well. He's going to be a fifth-year player by the time he comes in the NFL, which is always kind of a red flag for me. When you have the redshirt year there, it's not as bad. But the reason why it's not as bad, he's only going to be 22 and a half years old at the time of the draft. So it's not like he's a 24-year-old or 23-year-old or anything like that. Still relatively young. That's nice to see. If we can see a duplicate year, I'll feel a lot better about this. But even then, I still don't know how I feel about it. If he's just kind of like a product of this Georgia system that we've seen, he could absolutely be better than Stetson Bennett. I'm not trying to compare the two or anything like that, but I'm just not ready to commit to this. I'd much rather. I'm very excited about these two wideouts that we're going to talk about here. Why don't you go ahead, get into your next pick here, your 102, looking at 2025 rookie drafts.
Yeah, at the 102, I'm very excited about this player. It's like kind of a wide receiver 1A and 1B right now for me, but I'm giving the slight lead to Luther Burden out of Missouri. What he does after the catch is really, really impressive. He's one of those players that we've already kind of compared to Deebo Samuel for having that, extra ability after the catch where he looks like a running back. He's got that physicality. He's hard to tackle after the catch. And after a freshman year where he showed that off, we had a big question mark. Hey, going into his sophomore year, is he going to be able to kind of pull together a complete wide receiver profile? And in 2023, we did see him do more of that, put up some great stats. He had 1,200 yards on 86 receptions, 9 touchdowns, Bob, led that Missouri offense, and was really one of the best wide receivers in the nation. You should already be excited about getting this guy on your roster next year. We got some good wide receiver talent in next year's class. We got some good running back talent in this next year's class as well. But Luther Burden, he is a really impressive physical wide receiver, and the technique has been coming along. We've seen the improvement. I'm really excited to see what he does in his third year. I think he's bound to have the similar stats, if not improve. And if he improves, I mean, it's going to be hard to have anyone be wide receiver 1 over him.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, given the strength of the schedule he's faced, the number he's put up, I actually had to look this up because this just felt like super sus for me. I put these stats in here on the sheet that we're working off of. In his freshman season, he had 46 receptions for 398 yards. Yeah. And I'm like, there's no way. And sure enough, that is correct. He averaged 8.7 yards per reception, which is just paltry numbers, just terrible. But he backed it up this year with a better statistic, going 14.1 yards per reception. But, I like Luther Burden, a good year one, just looking at the raw production at this point, good enough freshman season. And then, like you've touched on, incredible sophomore year that a lot of, rookies coming out this year would be very jealous of. Yeah. Great touchdowns, strength schedule, did it against top competition. Not a lot of red flags in the production profile. I will say in this next wide receiver we're going to talk about, there is some red flags, believe it or not, just looking at the raw production. We'll talk about it, but before we spoil too much, go ahead and talk about your pick 3 here.
Yeah, and I do want to say one last thing on Luther Burden. He did average, all right, let me find it here. He did average 8.4 yards after the catch per reception.
Ooh, spicy.
That's really nice. Great. 5'11", 208. I just love his skill set. And, you talked about the, what was it? 8.7 yards per reception his freshman year. He was definitely used last year as, hey, let's get the ball in his hands and see what he can do. And then this year he developed more, 14.1 yards per reception, much more of a complete wide receiver. Now, moving over to my next pick here at the 103, we have another wide receiver who I'm really excited about, Bob. And I just compared Luther Burden to Deebo Samuel. I'm going to compare Tet McMillan to Mike Evans. He's got those kinds of that size, that speed, that contested catchability, the ability to be a true alpha wide receiver outside, playing the X. We know we don't see a lot of players at this point who are true X receivers and have that first round talent. A lot of times, we're seeing guys that get open. We're seeing guys that create yards after the catch. So Tet McMillan, he's that X alpha wide receiver. He's 6'5", 205 pounds. He's got the size and contested catchability, 50% last year on the contested catch rate. He's 1,300 yards, almost 1,400 yards, 15 yards per reception, Bob. So he's getting down the field. He saw 10 touchdowns. And this is an Arizona team that is improving. They lost their head coach who went to Washington, but most of their team actually was retained, stayed at Arizona. This is a team that is quietly going to put together a pretty good season, I think. Their quarterback there, Noah Fifta, I believe is his name. He had a really great end to the season. So the connection between him and McMillan going into next year, this is the guy that could press Luther Burden to be the wide
Mhm.
receiver one in next year's class. And they play the game a little bit different. I talked about Luther Burden with after the catch. McMillan, he is dominant at the catch point. Maybe a little bit of Roma Dunze-esque that we saw this year, but McMillan's even bigger.
Yeah, I think so. Getting to the red flags, because I've hinted at that, and that was talking about Tet McMillan here. Incredible freshman and sophomore numbers, raw production wise, incredible. But you look at the strength of schedule, which is something we have to take into consideration. Arizona in its freshman season, 60th ranked strength of schedule out of 130 some college eligible teams, and then 27th last year. So he still improved facing harder competition. You love to see that. You love to see players that don't wax and wane with the levels of strength of competition they're facing. He got better facing better competition. You love to see that. But you touched on the strong at the catch point, contested catch ability. One thing that stands out for me with Tet McMillan, just looking at some advanced analytics ish, I guess you call them that, but contested catches 34 last year, which feels like a boatload. That can be on the quarterback, that can be on him not separating, is what it is. Managed to wrangle 50% of them. You look at his freshman season, 21 contested catch opportunities, only wrangled 7 of them for 33%. So a little questionable there, but what's more pressing for me, because I contested catch, yes, you'd obviously love to see it, but how many situations he's getting into, that's something that I want to look at when I get into the film. And like I said, at this point, I haven't watched much film on any of these guys, maybe a game, if that. Some of these guys that were up for coming out this year, I've watched plenty of film on, but obviously for some I haven't even gotten into yet. And that's something that will highlight, hey, I need to watch for this on film. Does he really separate that well? Because if he doesn't, that's a concern at the next level. Something to definitely watch out for. So those are my chief concerns with Tet McMillan, but you can't deny the awesome production he's had. 700 yards as a freshman is pretty darn good. One thing that is kind of weird for him is he's a little bit older for a freshman. He was a freshman at the age of 19, sophomore at the age of 20. He'll be a junior at the age of 21, and he'll actually already be 22 years old at the time of drafting, despite only playing 3 college seasons. Not a big deal, really, in all honesty, to me. It's not like he's a red flag because he was older, but it's just something like that could have played into how he was developed and why he did so well in his age 19 season, putting up 700 yards as opposed to doing it as an 18 or 18 and a half year old, whatever the case is. Just things to think about. But we are moving along to a player that I just have a raw affinity for. I don't know if it's the matching hairstyles at one point or whatever the case is, but talk about this next player here at pick 4.
So at the 104, Bob, we got Quinn Ewers, the quarterback 2 right now for this draft. I will be honest, I am on the fence with Quinn Ewers. I am not convinced at this point that he is a first-round quarterback, but I was taking a look at my quarterback rankings for this next year's class, and after Carson Beck, I have very little confidence in any of these guys at this point. I think there is definitely a situation where there's a lot of guys that could develop into first-rounders. There's a lot of talent on the board, but there's not a lot of proven production at a high level. And Quinn Ewers has everything on the table for him to prove this year that he is a first rounder. There is certainly a pathway to him being a top 5 pick after this year. Texas is going to be in the national spotlight. They're going to be contending for the championship. He's got a lot of talent around him. And we have seen him improve over the last 2 years. And something to keep in mind with Quinn Ewers, this is technically his 4th year in college. Okay. He went to Ohio State for a year, redshirted there, moved to Texas, and now he's played for Texas for 2 years. So this is his 4th year in college, but Quinn Ewers came out of high school a year early. So it's almost like that first year where he was redshirting in Ohio State. That was his high school senior season. So it's interesting when you look at it. He's playing his 4th year technically in college, but it's really like his 3rd year if you look at how most high school recruits come out and go into college. So this is the year for him to prove that, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to be an NFL quarterback. He's definitely got the talent, definitely got the capability. I'm going to be really excited to see what he does, but he's someone that we could see here at the 104, or we could see him slip well farther than this, or, Arch Manning is right behind him, and Arch Manning is a really good quarterback. They don't need him. Quinn Ewers is a good quarterback as well, but if he starts to slip, Arch is definitely going to be knocking on the door. So Quinn Ewers, he was a little inconsistent over the past 2 years. We saw that a lot on Xavier Worthy's film. They just didn't connect a lot down the field. I'm a little worried about Quinn Ewers' deep ball. So if he can just bring it together, look, he's on the cover of the new college football game coming out. So he is a star in the college landscape, and he has to prove it this year. This is one of the players that has the most to prove and most to lose this season.
Oh, 100%. That's a great way to put it because it's 100% true. I feel his, expectations or first round draft capital possibilities, just kind of his value is like a falling knife at this point where is it going to land? If he can put it all together, increase the touchdowns or, and maybe decrease the interceptions along the way, but was able to put together a decent passing yardage season. I loved seeing that he was able to, add in some rushing yards. It's not anything crazy. It's 219 rushing yards for the season. You look at his previous year, though, playing most of the season, albeit banged up. That's another thing we have to, kind of monitor with him is he's had a ton of injuries over time here.
Yeah.
Only 47 rushing yards the previous season. Coming back with 219, they said that he was able to get a little more fit, get a little more in shape. Whatever the case is, he was able to, put that together, add that to that bit of his game that little bit. He's not just a statue back there anymore. He is somewhat of a threat. But yeah, he has a lot to put together as much as I like the guy. But you touched on it too. He has Arch Manning sitting behind him. And how long is it going to be if he struggles the first few weeks? How long is his leash? Because I don't think it's very long. And then you have the discussion of, well, where does he land if he comes out this year? Can he be a grad transfer, go transfer somewhere else and use up his last year of eligibility that way, if that's even a possibility. I know that was discussed at one point, but who knows? Quinn Ewers definitely up in the air and up in rookie drafts. Who knows? Like you said, we've talked about two quarterbacks already, the alleged top two quarterbacks in this class. Ton of questions, and we'll see what gets answered, what doesn't. But we got another running back coming up with questions. Who you got here at pick 5? Your running back 1 in this class.
Yeah, RB1.
Interesting pick here.
I have no conviction on my RB1, Bob. I'll be honest. I have no conviction here. But I've seen this guy play, and I feel like at this point, from what I've seen from these running backs, as long as Travion Henderson is healthy, he can be the best running back in this class. And we saw it last year as he did get a little bit more healthy. He did miss some time, unfortunately, in the middle of the season. But when he came back with a bang. So his first game back from injury was against Wisconsin. And he had 24 attempts for 162 yards and a touchdown, 4 receptions for 45 yards. I mean, when Travion Henderson is healthy and on the field, there are few running backs who can match him in his ability to break tackles, not just break tackles, but punish defenders, which is a bit of a red flag that we've talked about before in this channel. Is his running style part of the reason he gets injured so much? And that's something that we're going to have to talk about much more next year. But if he can be healthy, he is probably the best running back in this class. I do believe that. Now, there's question marks, like you mentioned. There's the injuries. There's the running style. Look, 5.9 yards per attempt this year. As a freshman in the Big Ten, he averaged 6.8 yards per attempt, Bob. His freshman year for Ohio State, 1,200 yards on the ground, 15 touchdowns to go along with 27 receptions for 300 yards. I mean, that production as a true freshman in the Big Ten for Ohio State, so impressive. Mm-hmm. If he can put it together this year, which I think he's going to have an easier path to staying healthy because they brought in another running back, which we're going to talk about very soon after this, who should help keep the carries away from, being too much for him, keep him healthy, keep the other guy healthy, and just create a two-headed monster out of that backfield.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be super interesting to discuss how those two running backs play out. We'll get to that for sure. Again, it's one of those, anytime you see this yo-yoing production in college, it's always concerning, albeit it's mostly linked to injuries. It's not like he's playing every game and his efficiencies is going up, down. He's also playing the top competition out there in the last 3 years, second strongest strength of schedule, third strongest, fourth strongest. So he's playing very good teams at Ohio State. So that's something to consider as well. But putting that elite college, that first season together, that freshman season is certainly impressive, but I'm really curious to see how this backfield plays out. And if he can replicate that freshman season again.
Yeah.
But the question is, can he do that with the backfield mate he has in addition? So we'll get to that in a little bit, but in the meantime, we have another pick to cover before we get to that. So who is your pick 106 here, Nate?
At the 106 here, we got Emeka Egbuka, who we were talking about last offseason, Bob, because we thought he might be coming out with the 2024 draft class, wide receiver out of Ohio State. But he dealt with injury. Ohio State had a couple injuries on their offense last year, kind of held them back a little bit. So Emeka Egbuka only ended up playing 10 games, including the Big Ten championship. Unfortunately, only had 500 yards this year after having over 1,000 yards last year. So he decided to go back to college. Ohio State is all in on this year to have a national championship. That's why Travion Henderson went back. That's why Emeka Egbuka went back. Their team is focused on this national championship run that they're about to make. And Egbuka also had something to prove after not having the season that he wanted to, dealing with injuries, a strong wide receiver class that we saw come into this season. He wanted to go back and come back out. I think he has every chance to be solidified into the wide receiver 3 of this class. I don't know if he can touch the other 2 guys at the top, McMillan and Burden, because of just the upside that they offer. I think Emeka Egbuka is a very, very good wide receiver. And after this year, I think he'll be very pro ready, kind of a plug and play rookie. I do expect him to be a first round pick as long as he's healthy and puts together a good season. His route running, very, very impressive. Good at creating yards after the catch. And just a consistent wide receiver out of Ohio State. We know how these guys have worked out recently. The Ohio State has been the wide receiver factory. And Emeka Egbuka, with 74 receptions for almost 1,200 yards in his sophomore year, he's another one of these guys that we're excited about.
Yeah. If Egbuka can replicate his sophomore season, I can almost confidently say he will probably be my wide receiver 2 in this class. And the best part about that is you're probably not going to have to draft him as your wide receiver 2 because there's a darn good chance Ted McMillan will go ahead of him, and an even better chance Luther Burden will. Both are a little younger. Both have had flashier production and haven't had that hiccup year in their junior year like Emeka Egbuka. But you look at his efficiencies, his raw production against top competition all 4 years. I doubt Ohio State's schedule is going to be a trash cakewalk this year. You look at all of these factors, Egbuka's production is nothing to sleep on. Like you touched on, he's a very refined route runner, great at all phases of the game. I think there's going to be that cliche of, well, he's probably just going to play slot at the next level because that's all he's done at Ohio State. I don't think that's the case with this guy. He's played 70% inside, 30% outside. I wouldn't rule that in that he's only going to be a slot receiver at the next level. I'm very excited to see Egbuka at the next level. He, like I said, I think consensus he'll be probably wide receiver 3. But at the end of the day, he should be probably in as much conversation for the number 1 in this class as the other 2, because if your only reasoning is age for those 2 options, I think you're missing out on a little bit of value here. But hey, like I said, you get to draft somebody who should be in the consideration for the number 1 at 3 prices, at the wide receiver 3 prices in this class.
I think it's going to be kind of a similar conversation that we actually had with Chris Olave, not just a helmet scout, but that's another player that went back for his 4th year and, maybe didn't have all the hype because of that, but still a very, very good wide receiver in his own right.
Yep, 100%. I agree. And hey, to keep helmet scouting, kind of, he's now at Ohio State. But what is your next pick here at the 107?
Yeah, we got 3 Ohio State players off the board in a row here. And here we got Quinshon Judkins, who has been playing for Ole Miss for the past 2 years, now joins Travion Henderson in the Ohio State backfield. And there are some people that have Judkins as the RB1. Through his 2 years, he's already put together almost 3,000 rushing yards. And he's also put together, a pretty good receiving work, 37 receptions, only 281 yards, though. So on yards per catch, not quite as much as maybe some of these other guys that we've talked about or going to talk about. But Judkins at Ole Miss was very, very productive. His freshman year, he had over 1,500 yards on the ground, which is very, very impressive. This is another guy that just took off from his freshman season. This is the guy that buried Zach Evans. Because Zach Evans moved from TCU to Ole Miss, and then Judkins said, "This is my backfield as a true freshman."
I love it.
And then he followed it up last year, had a pretty great season again. Didn't quite have as many rushing yards. His yards per attempt did go down by over a yard. Still found the end zone 15 times, though, 16 times in this freshman year. So he's been very, very productive, has now gone to Ohio State. So like I said, that backfield, so 2-headed monster, is going to be really, really productive. And they're also going to spell each other. So neither one of these guys are going to see, 250 plus attempts or anything like that. They'll both get used. And I have some questions with Judkins, and unfortunately, they come off the field. Nothing too crazy. There's no legal issues or anything like that. But we saw Adonai Mitchell fall in the draft this year because of some of his on the field as well as off the field concerns, just some character concerns, maybe just some things that maybe, coaches have found as headaches, reasons he's transferred out of Ole Miss, and reasons that a lot of his teammates at Ole Miss maybe weren't too upset when he transferred out of Ole Miss. Nothing indicting him to not be a talented player, not to be talented in the NFL. He's still a very good running back. I still want him on my dynasty rosters. But after seeing how Adonai Mitchell fell in this year's draft, I do wonder, with all the running back talent in this draft class, as good as Quinshon Judkins is, if he comes off as a headache to any of these GMs, they might look somewhere else because there's similar talent in this running back class. There's a lot of running back talent in this class. So I have Judkins here. I still think talent-wise he belongs here, but I just want to say it's kind of could be a pick your flavor thing for the running backs here next year.
Yeah, 100%. I'm very curious to see how this backfield plays out, because I could see, as fun as it is, and you label it as a powerhouse, and on paper it surely is, with two great running backs that have produced at great, capacities at the college level. I could see both these guys kind of cannibalizing each other, or one just completely blows the other out of the water if Henderson misses time, if Judkins were to miss time for whatever reason. I'm more concerned. This is, I think, for the college game and that team, awesome work getting two awesome running backs. But like what it could do to fantasy values, draft values, etc. Quinshon Judkins could always stay another year as well. He doesn't have to come out next year. Trevion Henderson, I think, could probably get another year added on to his eligibility. I could be wrong. I could be talking on my butt there. I don't know.
Maybe. I'm not sure how the COVID year still falls into play.
Yeah, I don't know. But either which way, maybe he does have to come out. Maybe Quinshon could stay and, everything's fine and dandy. Who knows? But very curious to see how these two play out. If I do have any bones to pick with Judkins, it's that, waxing and waning at levels of competition. Quinshon Judkins in his freshman season, 25th hardest strength of schedule. Then he dips in production that little bit, not a ton. And the strength of schedule doesn't go up that much, to the 10th hardest strength of schedule. In the grand scheme of the college landscape, that's not that big of a difference. It'd be different if it was like the 80th to the 10th and like you saw a huge dip in production, but it's nothing too crazy. Just something I'll be keeping an eye on for when we see a much harder strength of schedule that's almost guaranteed for Ohio State this year. So with that said, I was kind of surprised too in general just to see him be lower than Henderson, just based on, more consistent production over the first two seasons, whereas Henderson kind of had that dip year. But I get it. I don't necessarily hardly disagree or anything, but I was just kind of surprised. That's all. But we can go ahead and move along to the pick 108 here. What do you got?
I got another running back, Bob, because like I said, there's a lot of talent here and it could be a pick your flavor thing. And here at the 108, I have Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State, who was in the running for the Heisman at the end of the year. He actually got a couple Heisman votes himself, put up 1,700 yards last year, Bob, 21 touchdowns, had 39 receptions for 330 yards, had 31 runs of 15 yards or more. 950 of his 1,700 yards came on breakaway runs. He is extremely talented. He's got the speed to have those breakaway runs. He's also really good after contact, 3.71 yards after contact per attempt, which is a really nice number to see. He is 6'1", 211. He's got the size. He's got the speed. He's got the receiving chops. Ollie Gordon does everything right now. And he's only really here because this is 1 year production. His freshman year, he only had 305 yards. He was highly recruited out of high school. So he maybe just needed a year to kind of get that development, get ready for the college game. If he can put up another year similar to what he just did with Oklahoma State, I think there is also a situation where Ollie Gordon could be the RB1 in next year's class. I think he is certainly in the running after the year that he just put together. The production on a week-by-week basis, when you look at Ollie Gordon, against West Virginia, 282 yards, Bob, on 29 carries. That's 9.7 yards per carry for almost 30 carries. And he had 4 touchdowns. 4 touchdowns in that time. The game before that against Kansas, he only had 168 yards on the ground, but he caught 6 passes for 116 yards as well. And then the game after West Virginia, 271 yards against Cincinnati, 10.8 yards per attempt with 2 touchdowns. this guy has big games, has huge games, huge production. He was the Oklahoma State offense last year. And to put that team on his back, carry them to, I believe they played in the conference championship, against Texas. And this is a team that after the first couple of weeks, no one had them making the conference championship for the Big 12. And on the back of Ollie Gordon, they were able to get there. And if he can do anything similar to that this year, it's going to be hard to keep him out of the first round, that's for sure.
Oh, easily. Yeah, he'll be definitely in that consideration. Look at his production, just raw numbers, excellent. I mean, 1,700 yards, 21 touchdowns, plus adding on 39 receptions for 300 more yards. Incredible. And you said he was in the Heisman running. He actually came away with the Doak Walker Award, which is the best running back in college football. Nothing to scoff at either. Some previous winners, pretty incredible list. Bijan Robinson, Kenneth Walker, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor twice. Pretty incredible list and good company to be a part of. If I had any bone to pick with this, and this is just going back to looking at over 200 running backs that I've charted, the slight blemish to his production here is the strength of schedule. Looking at 31st hardest strength of schedule, which is not bad. Again, we just talked about Judkins having the 25th hardest. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's interesting. It's one of those things where it's just something to keep in mind. Oklahoma State probably going to have a tougher schedule this year, or there's a good chance since they were able to get to a conference championship last year. There's a good enough chance that maybe it's harder this year, and maybe we see some waxing and waning, or he rises to the occasion, and it's no longer a concern. Just thoughts to be had. Again, nothing I'm ruling in or out at this point, but it's things you got to pay attention to with, trying to make college production relative. We have to take into consideration the strength of schedule. His is not a red flag by any stretch, but just something I'm monitoring coming into the next year as we see what transpires. So moving along to the 109, interesting pick here, another transfer.
Yep.
Fun little interesting transfer, to say the least. What do you got here?
Yeah, this is a bit of a projection pick here, and it's Evan Stewart, now playing for Oregon, used to be playing for Texas A&M over the past 2 years. Texas A&M over the past 2 years has been very inconsistent. There's a reason that Jimbo Fisher was fired after this past year, despite it was kind of like a Russell Wilson with the Denver Broncos thing, where Texas A&M, to fire Jimbo, had to pay a lot of money to get him out of that contract. So it was pretty bad there at Texas A&M. Over the past 2 years, Evan Stewart has put together just over 1,000 yards, 600 yards or so in his freshman year, a little bit over 500 yards last year. So production-wise, Bob, I know he's not going to look super great for your score, and that's why this is a bit of projection, because coming out of high school, Evan Stewart was the number one recruit for his class coming out of high school. Him and Chris Marshall, who Chris Marshall is now, he was playing for JUCO. I think he's back in D1 now. So both of these guys have had some trouble throughout their college career so far. Evan Stewart, he's a good route runner. He's got the size, 6 foot, 180 pounds. He has the technique and the nuances of the wide receiver position, but the production has not been there. As I mentioned, less than 1,200 yards over 2 years, only 6 touchdowns in that time. His yak rec is under 3, so the yards after the catchability is really not there. Is it because of the situations he was put in, where he wasn't, given opportunities to create yards after the catch, or is that just not something he's capable of? You go to the contested catch area, and he's only had a 33% contested catch rate over his career. So that doesn't really give you a lot of confidence that he can rely on that either. So there's a lot of question marks about Evan Stewart, but now he's in Oregon. And if I know anything, Oregon's going to have a good offense. And Dylan Gabriel is the quarterback there. He's going to throw for a lot of yards. Tez Johnson is someone that we really like around here as well. Evan Stewart, though, he has the potential to be that wide receiver one, to grow into that, that guy that defenders are scared to guard against. We just need to see it. This is his opportunity. Oregon is the best place that he could go to be developed and to turn into that wide receiver. Let's see if he can do it. And if he can't, I would expect him to stay back for another year and see if he can make it happen.
Yeah, 100%. Touching on his lack of production last season, he did miss a good chunk of the year on the tail half of the year due to injury. So he might do okay, because all of my production scoring is on a points per game basis, or a per game basis. So if he misses time, he's not necessarily losing a ton of value in that sense. Faced good competition, 16th hardest strength of schedule, 29th hardest the year prior. has put up great numbers as a freshman as well. 643 yards, nothing to
It's a good
scoff
freshman
at.
year. Yeah.
So exactly, 100%. Size concerns are probably going to play a bit of a role here, and that could be what's playing into his poor contested catchability, or what
Mhm.
seems to be so on paper. That could 100% play into that. But definitely interesting. It's going to be kind of, I like Tez Johnson a lot, and it's going to be interesting to see how these two, combine and play together. While Tez Johnson also has size concerns, two
I was about
smaller
to say.
wideouts. But oddly enough, it still blows me away that Troy Franklin is as small as he is and look big next to Tez Johnson. So that's concerning a little bit possibly. But at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting to see how Dylan Gabriel brings this offense forward. Another
Mhm.
interesting quarterback for next year's class to keep an eye on, keep a pen in. But I have low expectations for NFL for him. But who knows? You never know.
He's a really good college quarterback. I just don't know if he'll
Yeah,
be a
yeah, very good college quarterback. Probably less than that at the next level. But I'm curious to see how things progress with these two. And speaking of these two, the pick here, pick 10, 110.
10.
Who do you got?
Pick Tez. We got Tez Johnson, the guy I just talked
Mhm.
about, Evan Stewart's running mate. And you could absolutely say that Tez Johnson should be over Evan Stewart. I kind of put them here together
Mhm.
for a reason because while Evan Stewart kind of has maybe more potential that we've seen in high school, we've seen the freshman year. Tez Johnson was incredible last year. You
Mhm.
could argue he was the best wide receiver for Oregon last year, and we saw Troy Franklin there, who a lot of us really liked. Last year, he transferred there from Troy, and in his first year at Oregon, 86 receptions, which on 106 targets, Bob, that was an 81% catch rate on his targets. So he caught most of the passes thrown his way, and he had almost 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns, 13.7 yards per reception. And this is where the fun comes in. 8.5 yards after the catch per reception. Tez Johnson is one of the best in the nation after the catch. It's really hard to catch him. It's hard to tackle him because you can't usually catch him. He's so quick. He's so fast. This is a guy that uses his size concerns to his advantage after the catch because he's listed here 5'10", 160. I wouldn't be surprised if he was 5'8", 160, to be honest. He kind of looks like a running back, a small running back out there running around, but he gets open and he creates a ton of yards after the catch. I think this is a player that 5-10 years ago, despite the college production, we probably wouldn't have a lot of interest in for the NFL. But in today's modern NFL, I think Tez Johnson has the capability to be a real playmaker. And we see that with the yards after catch. The yards per route run over the past 3 years has been over 3, and not just over 3 yards per route run. But at Troy, his final year, 3.52, and at Oregon last year, 3.45, Bob. That is really, really impressive. His efficiency numbers are really off the charts between the yak rack, the yards per route run. And hey, even at 50% of his contested catches last year, Bob, 2 out of 4.
Not too shabby. That just means he's not getting a lot of opportunities. He's getting
Hey, he's
separation.
getting open.
Hopefully, that's the dream at least. One of the big things for me in Tez Johnson's profile is unfortunately, he's going to be a bit of an older prospect. He's going to be 23 at the time of the draft or just after the draft. All the ages that we're discussing here are as of May 1st, post the 2025 draft. But one of the most incredible things is his strength of schedule comparisons over the course of his time. Starting at Troy in 2020, 100th ranked strength of schedule, 102nd in 2021, 76th in 2022. After he transfers, Oregon faced the 12th hardest schedule last year and didn't miss a beat. Actually had his best season to date. Was one of Bo Nix's, if not, one of Bo Nix's surefire go-to guys. As much as we love the, matchup with him and Troy Franklin, Tez Johnson was just as much one of his go-to targets. And that whole little brother thing, the little brother story, the adopted little brother and all that, pretty cool little concepts there. But at the end of the day, size concerns are going to play a role. Age is going to play a role. And I think that's what probably puts him a little lower in most drafts. Next year is going to be, people love to hate on age, but Tez Johnson, an incredible profile to keep an eye on if you're not tuned in already. Those efficiencies are nuts. I didn't know those off the top of my head. I'm just looking at raw production here. So definitely something to keep in mind. Curious to see again how this plays out with him and Evan Stewart, with Dylan Gabriel coming to town. Who knows? Who's little brother for Dylan Gabriel? Is it Tez Johnson or
Yeah.
is it Evan Stewart?
Yeah.
Who knows? Who's he having breakfast with? That's what we need to know, and need to take into the utmost consideration. But with that said, Tez Johnson in the books. We are moving on to pick 111. What do you got here?
111. We got another running back, Bob. A running back who had an incredible freshman season, but maybe regressed a little bit in his sophomore year.
Mhm.
This is Nicholas Singleton out of Penn State. He was extremely highly recruited out of his high school, a top 2 or 3 running back in his class, and going to Penn State. So it was like a match made in heaven. You got one of the top running back recruits going to Penn State. And he showed out his freshman year, his true freshman year, just over 1,000 yards, 6.8 yards per attempt, 12 touchdowns, also had a couple receptions, and then improved upon his receptions his sophomore year. Also, 4.58 yards after contact per attempt, Bob. Anytime you get over 4, that's pretty impressive. 4.58, really impressive. Nicholas Singleton, 6 foot, 225 pounds. He is one of those physical athletes. He's obviously been in the weight room a ton ever since high school and can carry that over into Penn State. He's hard to tackle. He's really, really fast, but his sophomore year regressed a little bit. On more attempts, ran for less yards, only had 753 yards this past year with Penn State. He is sharing a backfield with Katron Allen, though, who's a very good running back in his own right. Someone we'll probably be talking about as well next year. Had 8 touchdowns this year, but his yards per attempt dropped from 6.8 to 4.4. That's over 2 yards that it dropped. That is a little concerning for me. His yards after contact per attempt also dropped pretty drastically from 4.58 to 2.84. Not quite 2 yards per attempt, but almost, which is not great. Not great. One thing that I worry about with Nicholas Singleton is athletically, he's got it. He could be in the NFL already with his athletic profile. But is Nicholas Singleton going to fall into that bucket for me where I have to say this guy looks more like an athlete playing running back than he is an athletic running back? And I don't want to say that just yet, but we might be starting to trend that way if he can't improve upon his sophomore year. And I think this gets a little exaggerated maybe because his backfield mate, Katron Allen, is a very good running back. This is a two-headed monster that Penn State has. Not quite as good as Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins with Ohio State, but probably a top 5 running back room in the nation between Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. Katron Allen is a really, really good running back, and his vision and ability to read the offensive line sometimes just in contrast shows that Nicholas Singleton doesn't quite have that. So we're going to see it more this year. Penn State, they're going to be in the spotlight. They're going to make the playoffs this year. Remember, the playoff is now a 12-team playoff instead of a 14 playoff. So Penn State, if they don't make it, they're going to be very, very disappointed. So we will get to see a lot of Nicholas Singleton this year, and we'll see if he can improve upon his sophomore year regression.
Yeah, the one nice thing, if there is a silver lining to his sophomore season, getting a lot more involved in the passing game is certainly one of it. Going from 11 receptions in 2022 up to 26, pretty efficient with those touches as well, racking up 307 yards. Good enough for me. But yeah, it is one of those things where it's like, I have not been plugged into the Devy world my entire life. Have got into it over, the span of Dynasty, needing to have some pulse on what's coming up down the pipeline, interactions with you, discussions with you, etc. Now joining a C2C league. And I remember that, gauging the level of things that work their way up to my ears, that Nick Singleton was like God's gift to running back. And he was, super high recruit, all this and that, the next big thing at running back. And then it's always kind of like, well, this is disappointing. A 1,000-yard freshman season with 12 touchdowns. Awesome. Comes back with 753 rushing yards for 8 rushing touchdowns. And it's one of those like, what happened? The strength of schedule didn't really change. They went from 10th hardest to the 9th hardest. Nothing crazy changing there. So it's definitely a concern, and something like you said, maybe that's how it shows up on tape, is that he's not as much of a running back as he is an athlete, which at the next level we know does not fly. You can not be athletic and be a good running back, apparently, but you can't be a good athlete and not be a good running back and be a good running back in the NFL. But with that said, we have one more pick. I'm sure there's been folks shouting from the rafters,
Right.
at wondering where this quarterback was, where he will be. And honestly, like I 100% get the concerns because looking at his stats, just raw numbers wise, pretty darn good. Strength of schedule comes into play here a little bit, but in general, talk about this quarterback that we got here at 112, rounding out the final pick in this draft.
Yeah, I couldn't not have Shador Sanders in our first round mock. I had to have him in here. And I put him here at the end just because, like I said, I really don't know what to do with this quarterback class at this point. Obviously, in all the 2025 mock drafts, you've seen Shador Sanders in the first round. Some people have him as the quarterback one. I think a little bit of that comes from the publicity of being Deion Sanders' son and the publicity that Colorado has gotten. But Sanders is a great quarterback. His completion percentage this past year was really impressive, almost 70%. You did mention that the strength of schedule is not that great, and he did play for Jackson State the 2 years previously, and he absolutely dominated at Jackson State. In fact, his freshman year or his first season starting, he actually won the Deacon Jones Trophy, which is basically the Heisman of HBCUs. So he came out and just was one of the best players in the nation for his level of play. He moves to Colorado with his father, and he puts together a pretty good season, especially with an offensive line that was, needless to say, not great. And that's also maybe part of my concerns with Sanders is that he's picked up some unhealthy habits behind that offensive line where, he has a good completion percentage, but he has trouble not taking sacks. Shador Sanders, at the end of the day, I think he can certainly be a first rounder. I mean, I expect Colorado to probably have a similar season to where they had last year. They've moved a lot of players in and out of the transfer portal. It's hard to have continuity there and improve. But if they can, Sanders is going to be one of the main benefactors of that. It's not a weak quarterback class, but it's a very unknown quarterback class. I do think that Sanders has as good a shot as anyone to be the quarterback 2, quarterback 3, possibly even the quarterback 1. I think teams are probably going to like a lot of what he brings to the table. He's got a calm demeanor on the field. He's good completion percentage, always has been. And of course, being Deion's son doesn't hurt at all with that NFL connection and the publicity and jerseys that he'll sell necessarily. So I do like Sanders. I just have question marks about Colorado in general. And then also just how does Sanders translate to the NFL at this point? And what kind of season does he give us? Because I really don't know what to expect from Colorado. I believe, I can't remember the number off the top of my head. They've basically turned over their entire roster through the transfer portal. And we've never seen anyone do that before, except for Colorado last year. And, they didn't have the best season last year. They did go over their win total, I believe, that they were given at the beginning of the year. I think they won 4 games. It's hard to put together a championship level team, a playoff contending team when you're having so many players come in and out of that roster. So I don't know what's really going to happen with Sanders, but I could not include him in this draft. So here he is. He gets in.
Great raw production, right out the rip. Like I said, you look at the stats, you look at the raw numbers, what's not to like. Has good rushing numbers and not like crazy rushing numbers either, where he's not like the over embellished rushing quarterback. Like he can do it for sure, but he is primarily a passer, and that's where a lot of his work is coming from. That's something you like to see out of college quarterbacks. The one thing in all of my production going through 153 quarterbacks so far, that list is growing over time. But when you see a bad strength of schedule for quarterbacks, that's a bad sign. And that's what Shador Sanders is facing. That's what he's up against, albeit every rule has outliers. And the one thing that is nice for him out of the outliers that have shown after facing poor levels of competition, very, very, very good production grades, which he'll have a very good raw production grade. So that's something to think about, something to consider for sure. But, the concerns are certainly there at the end of the day. And then obviously draft capital is going to play a role. He is also a little older for some reason. We tried diving into it, also going to be 23. Just could not put it together why he's a little bit older. Didn't see like any type of gap year or anything like that, unless maybe he did during the COVID season, just happened to just say, nah, I'm not doing it this year. I don't know. But he's a little bit older. He's 23, only playing 3 years of college football. But yeah, definitely red flags. And hey, we like to, with quarterbacks especially, I think we like to take it slow. with when we put him up the board. We threw that to the wind with Carson Beck this one, but everybody else who
I love
usually
Carson Beck. Come on.
I know you it's a strange affinity, but hey, I'll let you have it. But
He's the best passer in the SEC. That means something.
fair enough. I'll give it to you. Like I said, I have not watched enough film to really have too much of an opinion on that. Like I said, I'm just here for the raw production discussions and other discussions of, how this could impact your current team. And this is something we touched on at the top of the video. Some questions I want to run through. Getting into one of the first questions I have. We did not draft a single tight end. You did not draft a single tight end in the
No.
first round. Is that because this tight end class sucks? Are all of the other positions just very, very good this year? Is that another position we're kind of just waiting and seeing on? Or are there a ton of good tight ends that it's like, well, we can just wait. I'll just wait to draft the last one that's really good.
I don't think we have a Brock Bowers in this class. We don't have like that obvious tight end one playmaker at the next level. This guy's going to be a game changer. So for me, none of these tight ends make it into round one at this moment. I do think that we could have 3 tight ends in the second round, though. I think there is some tight end talent in this class. One guy I want to mention is Colston Loveland out of Michigan. He's currently my tight end 1 for next year. I think he's been very, very productive through his first 2 years. I like what he brings to the table. He's been a really good pass catcher. Luke Lakey out of Iowa, next Iowa tight end who's up. He missed some time because of injury, but when he's been on the field, he's been really, really impressive. And also, got to mention Benjamin Urasek from Stanford. He's now transferred to Georgia. Talk about a transfer up from Stanford, who was one of the worst teams last year, to Georgia, who they're looking for their Brock Bowers replacement, and they went after Benjamin Urasek. Mike Bowers is so validated in this. Benjamin Urasek, Luke Lakey, Colston Loveland, and then also Tyler Warren for Penn State, another guy I think we need to keep an eye on. So there's 4 tight ends, Bob. I think all those guys could be second rounders. I don't know if any of them will sneak into the first round, though.
You want to talk about a true test of a college player's aptitude? Benjamin Urasek going from Stanford, who had the 65th hardest schedule last year, to Georgia, who had the 4th hardest strength of schedule last year. So
we'll see.
That's gonna be a trial by fire for sure. I want to get your thoughts, because with having no tight ends, it's something to think about. Hey, if you have a favorite tight end out there that you want to be drafting next year that you're keeping an eyeball on, let us know in the comments. Be sure to do that. So we kind of talked about, tight end is not necessarily a strength or weakness of this class, but there are certainly some. I think the glaring weakness of this class is going to be quarterback. And right now that's partially due to the uncertainty we see. Is there anything you're doing with your roster decisions, your drafts, your rookie drafts, maybe even your startup drafts? Is there any impacts being made because of the question marks regarding this quarterback class, or the running back class kind of seems like a bit of a strength right now? Good enough wide receiver class. What moves are you making, or what differences in approach do you have off this class, if any?
Yeah, this class, the 2025 class, actually complements the 2024 class really well. The 2 biggest strengths for the 2024 class were wide receiver and quarterback. And not that wide receiver is bad in 2025, but you can invest in wide receivers now. You can invest in quarterback now. Sure. And while quarterback is not a strength of next year's class at this point, I do, like I said before, there is talent in there. There's some high recruits that have put together decent seasons, like Drew Alar, put together a good season last year, but not the kind of season that makes you go, oh, that guy's an NFL quarterback. There's also like Cameron Ward, who was at Washington State, transferred to Miami. He's going to be an older prospect, but he could be a guy that really rises up boards next year as he puts together probably a pretty good season for Miami. Jackson Dart with Ole Miss is someone else that, some people really like, some people have as the quarterback 1. And would maybe have in this first round mock. So there's some quarterbacks that are definitely capable of strengthening up this class, but I'm investing in quarterback now, not relying on next year's class. If I want running backs, though, I think next year's where we see that turnover, the changing of the guard, let's say. We have these older running backs. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott has a starting job now. He's back to have a starting job in the NFL. Alvin Kamara is still out there. Joe Mixon has a starting job still. These older running backs, they're still good, but they're going to hit that age cliff here soon. Austin Eckler, guys like those guys have been staples for the last couple years, and we haven't really had the running back class this past year to refill that, maybe even the year before that. I think next year, depending on who comes out, there's a lot of talent, so maybe some of it stays back and strengthens the 2026 class, but I think there's going to be a lot of running back talent in next year's class. I think teams know that as well. I think NFL teams drafted this year knowing that there's a lot of running back talent next year. So I'm Counting my running back eggs in my 2025 basket, if you know what I mean.
I don't know that I do, but I'll take it for whatever it's worth. Yeah, 100%. I think addressing your quarterbacks as early as you can with this, looming question mark, and hey, being that much more plugged in, knowing what's going on with the next year's class, can get you ahead of bad situations. If you would have done that with the running back class this year, although it was expected to be a much better one than it is, but hey, learn to adapt, and things of that sort. So the last question I have is, are there any other honorable mentions that you want to talk about that you think could sneak into the top 12, or could be very notable second round picks that could be even considered on the fringe of the first or second round?
Yeah, actually, I want to mention a couple more quarterbacks because I think that this quarterback class is really deep with potential talent. But like I said, I don't know who it's going to be outside of Carson Beck, of course. Um,
Sure.
so there's also Graham Mertz at Florida, who's come back for another season, and we could hey, you're familiar with Graham Mertz a little bit.
I am a little
Um,
familiar with Graham Mertz. He was supposed to be Wisconsin's second coming of Christ, and then
was
he just decided he was not good at football anymore, and then he transferred out. So
Well, he's been better at Florida, and I
thank
expect him to
God.
be pretty good this year. Grant Nussmeier, or Garrett Nussmeier, sorry, LSU, sitting behind Jaden Daniels last year. He could have started for a lot of college football teams, but ended up being the backup for a Heisman Trophy winner. And then also Connor Wegman for Texas A&M. He was someone that was highly recruited, looked good in a small sample size last year, so we'll see what he can do. Texas A&M has plenty of talent on their offense. And of course, I can't not mention Jalen Milroe, the quarterback for Alabama.
Mm.
I don't think that at this moment, Jalen Milroe looks like an NFL quarterback that I'm going to really rely on, but he's a very exciting college quarterback. And if he can improve his technique, become more accurate, there's always that setup where he could grow into an NFL quarterback, rise up boards, and with his playmaking ability, be someone that we're really excited about next year. So a lot of quarterbacks that we can get excited about. We just got to see how this year plays out. At the running back position, it's a shame that I only had four guys in my first round, because there's also other talents that could possibly be in the first round next year. And if not, get kicked back to the second round. You're going to get some good running backs. Guys like Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State, one of the best pass catching running backs in all of the nation right now. Marion Hampton out of North Carolina. He's been really impressive. Bob, I know you liked him in the film that
Love
you've
him.
seen. Travis Etienne's younger brother, transferred from Florida to Georgia. He's going to be the starting running back for them this year. He is explosive and could have a huge year where he rises up boards. Damian Martinez from Oregon State moved to Miami. A lot of these guys are transfers, and they're transferring up and getting opportunities there. So it could be really, really exciting. And then wide receiver, one guy I do want to mention that I thought about putting into the first round here is Isaiah Bond, who transferred from Alabama to Texas. Sounds so far with this spring practices that Isaiah Bond has been really explosive. He's a downfield threat, super fast. He's been really good for Texas, probably taking over that Xavier Worthy role a little bit. So Isaiah Bond, he could be a big riser as well in the wide receiver position. So there's, we're still a year out. I'm really excited about this college football season. There's so much talent in this 2025 draft class, but we need to see the production this year to really solidify these names.
It always comes down to the production, and that the old draft cycle adage of, hey, if you're not moving or improving your draft stock, you're falling behind. And there's a lot of players with question marks, and hey, that's what the draft process and cycle is all about: erasing those question marks, answering those questions along the way. And hey, if you want to answer questions with us along the way, subscribe if you're new. Get in that Patreon Discord if you haven't already. Patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Try us out for a free week on us. And hey, if you want a peek at Nate's Devy rankings, checking out earlier classes or classes ahead of time, Patreon can do that for you as well. We're going to get the heck out of here. Before we do, leave a like, comment on the video, maybe who we missed. Be nice. This is still a very early rendition of what 2025 mocks could look like. We want to know what players we should be keeping more of an eyeball on if we're not already. But with all that said, we're going to get the heck out of here. Thank you all for watching. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.